Alrighty, folks. Today I am going to create this video to accompany the GitHub Atari VCS GML, which has been a place. It's a repo that's been a place that we've been storing information about how to get a GameMaker game to work on the Atari VCS. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible to show that it's not that complicated. I'm not going to actually go through every step, but I'm going to explain the basics. So in the repo, you'll find a bunch of different files. If I just hit over there now, it's LA Game Studio / Atari VCS GML. And this version has certain files. It's going to be updated soon, but there's also this release section on the right. So releases has different things in it. It's not to be looked at as subsequent releases. It's more or less different experiments that resulted in success for varying configurations and different versions of GameMaker. So if you're not fully aware of this, GameMaker is always updating, and there is a way to use a legacy account. And also there's the GameMaker long-term service, LTS, or long-term support. That version may be closer to the version that I refer to as GameMaker IDE 589. But essentially what it is it's a version of GameMaker that has been proven to build properly on older versions of Ubuntu like 2004 or 1804 rather, that allow you to build on that version of the operating system, and then that executable works flawlessly on the VCS because, flawlessly with the asterisk that networking doesn't seem to work very well. But at least simple URL networking doesn't seem to be working. But other than that, works fairly flawlessly, and is the version of the IDE that the utility input candy that is in the store, VCS store, that's free for all developers, that allows you to see the diagnostics. So the diagnostics in there correspond to the diagnostics in anything built in that IDE, which uses an earlier version of SDL, and that version of SDL properly detects the classic as well as the modern. But basically, you do not have to figure out how to go back to this version. Instead, you use these one-shot servers. And I'm going to briefly show you, how these work. So the server runs, again, not flawlessly solved, but fairly flawlessly solved. So the way these servers work is they're in a script, and you tell the Atari dashboard, the dev dashboard, the store dashboard, to run a script. And in that script, it first launches the server, and then a few seconds later launches your game. And your game can be written in the latest version of GameMaker. It does not have to be written in any specific version of GameMaker. But this server is already pre-built in the version of GameMaker that adequately detects the classic and also the modern, and corresponds to the input candy diagnostic tool. So you'll need to download the pre-built version. That is I would download all of the versions here. But the one that you're going to want, so there's two types of servers. One server is a GameMaker specific server, and that uses one set of networking commands that are available in GameMaker. So if you go to GameMaker and you go to the manual. Okay, and then you type network up here. You're going to see networking section. And it uses this async event in an object. So a controller object or an object that has no it's just an object that's running every step. It's probably persistent. I'll show you what mine's set up to be in a second, but it is those things. This object is doing some things. But anyway, the point is that there's two types of networking in GameMaker. There's raw networking and there's not raw, okay? And what it means is that the raw version is like calling a network command in any low-level language like C or C++ or an API from Windows. So those networking commands it's like the raw bytes, and they give you all that you need to use that. But anything can connect to that. And GameMaker has created kind of a walled garden approach that provides just the most basic level of security. And what that does is it provides you with a version that handshakes silently. And we'll call that GameMaker networking versus raw networking. So GameMaker networking has a hello handshake that determines that, oh yes, the client is indeed a GameMaker game. So that's great for GameMaker. But this procedure that I'm outlining in this repo, this procedure could be done with any engine. Any engine that can't detect the classic and is able to have networking support and can handle JSON is probably, Godot is one of those, but probably Unity could do this. Probably Unreal could do this. Now, you may not need those things for those engines, but it is available. And if you were writing it in any Linux engine that builds on Ubuntu 18.04, or could be an app image that we deconstruct and will run on that. So anything up to present time will run on that if you do some special things. Then that engine can use the raw version. So that's what's going on in here. We've got these gamepad servers, and there's the raw, and then there's the regular. And the names are cut off here, but I can see in the tiny status bar that this has the dev and staging version of the pre-built, and it's the GameMaker version. And down here is the same dev staging version, but it's called the Atari VCS raw gamepad server. So it's able to be used with Godot and other things. For example, Skyfrizz uses, or I think we use this server with Skyfrizz, I'm not really sure, but he writes in QBasic, and it is theoretically possible for somebody even using like QBasic to be able to use this server to get controller information. That being said, this is just a general Linux sort of solution. Even though we're talking about GameMaker, most of the stuff we're going to do that is outside of GameMaker is Linux controls. So, that's why it solves the problem for really any engine. That being said, the first thing you're going to have to do, so let's just talk about it in terms of GameMaker. What is the process? And the process is you have to get this server going. You have to run it, get your script and your game set up, get it into your test environment. All of that is the same for no matter what you're doing. But then you have to modify your GameMaker code to use a specific set of instructions, functions that have a fallback. And the reason why that is because and it could be a fallback, it cannot be a fallback, but you're probably going to have it as a fallback. So you're going to have this other controller level between you and the GameMaker controls. So gamepad commands, the gamepad functions, they have to be pushed further away, and a middleware solution that I'm going to publish soon, that I've published called ShamePad, but I'm going to call it J in the future. J is just basically, it's going to, if it's in a certain environment, it's going to reach out and see if the server is available. And if the server is available, it's going to go to the server, and it's going to use the server's controller information rather than the controller information from the gamepad functions. Otherwise, it would use the gamepad functions. And the reason why there's that fallback switching thing happening is because usually you're testing on Windows, then you're putting it on the Atari, then you're testing on the Atari, and then you're making changes in Windows, testing them in Windows, and then putting them on the Atari. So you need to be able to use the old school gamepad controls to test on Windows if you're adding features, and then test the gamepad controller stuff specific to the Atari only on the Atari. But you need the same code to run on both platforms. So I'll get into some of the nuances of that, but that's the thinking behind this idea that you're going to have this server running. It's a TCP/IP server. I should draw a picture, but basically the diagram is very simple. There's a TCP/IP server. When it's available, it will use that. When it's not available, it will fall back to the gamepad functions in GameMaker, which will not work on the Atari. So it's called a one-shot server because it only allows for one connection, and then it kills itself. And that's because it's done all in a local network. We're talking about networking, but we're talking about really a loopback or an in-computer network, a virtual network inside the computer. So it's localhost only. So what happens is, because it is technically possible for you to set this server up on the Atari and then access it from Windows. That's possible. And you can do that by downloading the gamepad client and running the gamepad client pointed at your Atari. Okay? But let's not get too deeply into that. You don't need to do that, although it is possible. Cats are going crazy in another room. Sorry for the delay. So what you'll want to do is just download if you're a GameMaker developer, download the gamepad one-shot servers. And I have two versions of it. You really only need the production version, but you might want to get the dev version as well. But when you publish it to the store, you want to be able to, I would really appreciate it if you did not use the dev or staging version, because that version does not show my logo. And also it shows scary diagnostic information. Users should just see the logo and then your game. That being said, let's look at this script real quick. So here we have the script. The CD part, you probably don't need that. This line sets up a folder called usr-lib. You can actually shorten this to just lib or libs. But this is a folder that's going to be packaged along with your executable that you build in GameMaker for the Linux box. That includes the library files that it needs, the .so files. And you're telling it with this line to say, okay, there are the installed OS libraries, but please search this folder first. Then it launches the controller server of your choice. This one happens to be living in a subfolder called Atari controller server, server rather. But this is the one that you got out of the zip file called Atari VCS GameMaker Gamepad Server One-Shot Pre-Built 589 Production, for example. You just put it in a folder called Server next to your executable on the Atari. Then it waits 3 seconds. So it launches the server, lets it get a handle on the network, lets it fail out if it does, but it won't. And it also waits just 3 seconds to show my logo in a sane amount of time. And then once everything's stabilized, it then launches the game. Now, and then the game runs, and with the modifications to your code, it will connect to the server. The server, which can be monitored in a testing environment, will start spitting out JSON, and you'll be able to move the controller and see the JSON change. If you didn't run your game, you could still just run the server like that in an SSH window and see what happens. You'll be able to see the text output. There's a way to do that. Using the export display equals :0 command. I'll get to that. But basically, you can test through that. You're going to be able to see it. And then that JSON is actually consumed not directly through the console, but rather via the network. It is consumed every single frame of your game by downloading that from the internal server, which is no latency whatsoever. So you're going to see a live JSON snapshot of all of the controllers. And it just so happens that snapshot resembles the input candy format. So, but slightly simplified, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Input Candy was a library that I wrote to do diagnostics when I was first writing games for the VCS, and also because I wanted to have some features like actions and programmability and user configurability. And while I've never used it specifically, it did end up, on the VCS, it did end up being a part of this game, or this server, and so it allows me to just quickly capture information. It's freely downloadable. It's linked. It's part of the LA Game Studio account on GitHub. So you're able to download that and look at it, line for line. And it's a pretty good input library, but it has some, nuances to it. There's also a simple version. But basically, I don't know how you wrote your controls, but I'll show you how mine are set up and how they evolved to be the way they are. But you always want to keep your controls sort of at arm's length. You should never be directly accessing gamepad functions all over the place. And if you have to change that, you can simply create a new function that's similarly named but has a special tag on it, and then mass rename everything. And then you're at least abstracting away from the real function, because in our case, we can't call the real function anymore. You're going to be calling a function that I provide you, but you can also write yourself. And all it basically does is it looks to see if the global variable controller server, or pad, I think I call it pad server data, something like that, pad data. This global variable gets populated with a network async. So every time networking happens, it repopulates this variable, or it sets it false if there's no server. So this allows you to fall back. So you check, but that you need to write functions that capture that modularly, so you're not calling them directly, because you never, don't repeat yourself. All of those principles come into play. Anyway, at that point, the controller should work, because you're pulling data from this server and you're using that, and that's going to be rock solid, but it's not going to be a one-to-one. There are special signals, and I'll explain those briefly. And I meant to actually have my face on this video, but I would have held up the controller and explained. But basically, in this repo, if we go back to code, if we go to the old, I think it's in this file as well, but let me just double check. Yeah. So if you go down here, there's a lot of confusing. This is all going to be updated, but it doesn't really need to be, but I thought it would be better to maybe, this goes into the granularity, but I'm going to do the fast way, the way that I just did it a few weeks ago, and then we can get into the nitty gritty later. So if I go back up to the top and I go to the readme.old, if you go to the bottom, and you're welcome to join my Discord, look for Retro Friends on the Lost Astronaut Discord, and try to talk to me about your issues. But basically, you should be able to do this without too much intervention. So the first thing you do is, or in this file, which is the older version, and you don't need to follow it. We've tried to make it a little more concise since then, but way, way down here at the bottom, all the way at the bottom, perhaps before this code though. Nope. Okay. Right. So there's a section called Part 4, Controller Notes. And this describes how, at the time, and it's still, you'll see this stuff if you run Input Candy, the utility in the VCS store, you'll be able to use the modern controller and read this information out of the data that's shown to you in that program. But I've already copied it out here to this table. So basically, when you move the left thumbstick, it kind of tells you that, left and right and up and down do a certain thing. The right thumbstick is a little different. The D-pad is like rotated and inverted. So it's actually hat 0 that you want to pay attention to. And left is right, up is up, right is down, and down is left. Okay, so this information is really useful. By the way, that weird up, left, right, down thing is also true it's the same on the classic. And that is, I guess you could use that to detect it or something, because it's a very specific mistake that's on this hardware. But it also tells you how to detect the Fuji button, and it's slightly different on the classic versus the modern. If you're going to be doing anything on the classic, you're limited to directions, a single rotation axis, and then, which really only indicates to you the direction it's being turned. It does not really give you a one-to-one. Like, up is not always, you know what I mean? Like even though it clicks, click, 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 click as it turns around, it's really not really precise. And I've yet to be able to get it to do anything other than detect what direction it's turning in. But there may be a way, I don't know. But you're getting an axis value and looking at its delta. And then the back button and the Fuji in the menu, and then A and B. So you only have 2 buttons, directions, and a twist, which limits the number of things that you can do without doing a visual menu or something like that would cover the other controls that would be available to you on the modern, because there is distinction between left and right thumbstick. There are the stick buttons, for example, which is a horrible design. I never use them, but they are there. The triggers, but you're not going to get... So if you read through this, it says right trigger, left shoulder, right shoulder, all right? Left stick, start, back select, Fuji is back select. But then the back button is left trigger, so there is no distinction between shoulder left and left trigger. So you're going to have to look at these things in either the diagnostic tool or just take this at face value, but you'll probably need to look at both. And it does tell you which axis in the axis list. So axis 2, when it starts at a list starting at 0, it's the third in the list. So for left trigger. So you do get an axis for that one. And that's how you detect if it's been pulled. And you get an axis for the right trigger. So anyway, this is great information, and you're going to need this if you're going to be remapping your controls, because that's basically the process. So after you've downloaded those things from the releases menu, I'll go back, or releases section, 5 releases. You're going to download, you're going to go to the first thing that says Atari VCS GamePad Server one-shot versions. You're going to remember that you're going to need this script. You can even copy it right now if you wanted, because you're going to paste that into a text file. But then you're going to download these, the production and probably also the dev version, and you're gonna have that in your toolbox, and then there's other things here. So, So here's what is this? this is the source code for the server for the raw version. And the reason why I give you the source code, but you're never going to build it because it must be the pre-built one. But if you're concerned and want to look at the source code to understand what it's doing, you're welcome to. Then there's the gamepad broadcast server, the gamepad networking version. And in this section, it actually does describe to you what this JSON format is going to look like that you get back in that global variable. So there's the F, which is a frame number. So you could check against that to make sure that you're not looking at an old state. I never use that, but it is there for you. And then there's D, which is an array of object structs that contain the device descriptions. And then correspondingly, under the S or states list, you've got structures in an array that describe the states of those devices. So there's the device 0, for example, in the list, and the state 0, which are the same device. We'll call that player 1's controller is device 0, state 0. Okay? If it's present, you have to check to see if it's connected. Because as you connect, the device list will grow in the order that it's connected based on the order of the USB port. And if you have a hub, that adds complexity to that. But you can do up to 11 on really, but I support up to 8 reliably because that works both on Windows and on the Atari VCS. But you can have up to 8 controllers connected and distinct. So it also, but anyway, it kind of talks to you a little bit about, how this worked, but we're going to move on from this. This is just description of what's on this, but there's more going on here. So then it gives you the client and server, just so this was for somebody who only wanted to use this for the classic only. And I gave them both the client and its server and its source code. There's probably a pre-built one somewhere. Yeah, here it is. So you can get the pre-built one. So the point of this is if you have controller support, but you're running Godot and you want to be able to, access it. Although I just realized it's not in raw mode, maybe. And because of that, you'd have a little extra handshaking there. Not sure about that. All right. And then, so then there's this section. And for Apolloon, I downloaded these libs. Okay. And they worked except one lib was missing. So I was able to use this package. So let me just download that right now and I'll show you the inside of this. So, on Windows, it uses DLLs. On Linux, it uses libs. And you'll see here, and I know it's tiny. Can I zoom? Well, I guess I can. Not really, though. Guess not. All right, wild. Okay, well, this is, these are the ones required for GameMaker. Okay? I think they're all here. I think maybe one was missing, and I had to update that. And I think it was libSSL. Let me quickly turn my Atari on to demonstrate these other steps. Oh, it's already on. Right. Okay, so let's talk about the other software that I use to do this. So we all have our preferences here, but I use WinSCP. WinSCP is a SSH-based file transfer program. So SCP and SSH are essentially the same thing. Slight differences, but essentially the same thing. I'm going to turn my TV on back here so that I can look at the Atari because it's timing out, so it's not working. So let's get it. Give me 1 second. Turn on and off the Atari. Okay, it's on. It was just, how about I just turn it off? I think I turned it back on, though. I just needed actually to use the, probably could have turned it on if I grabbed the controller, actually. All right, so now it should work. So, yeah, WinSCP. So let's just go to their website real quick. I think it's winscp.net. But anyway. And just be careful of the download buttons. Make sure you're clicking not this button, but this button, the green button. Okay? So, and then it'll do this, and then that's fine, and then it downloads. Okay? I've actually given money to this project. I don't give money to a lot of projects, but this has been a very useful tool, so I gave him some money. And now I have unlimited free updating and don't have to go to the website very much. Anyway, I'm going to run this again. Okay. It's sort of, whoa, what? Okay. It looks like this. It's like a Norton Commander sort of view. On the left is the local host, and on the right is the remote host. And in this case, I've got it set up as user at Atari VCS, but I use the Atari's host name. And the way I was able to get this LAN address, you can either look at your router list if you're capable of looking at your devices in your router list, and it provides that information because some don't anymore. Or you can head on over to your VCS and look at the system settings under networking. And I recommend it be plugged in, that you have Ethernet, so that you can get this LAN address. Anyway, I'm going to click login now, and it's going to log in as user at user with the password user. Ignore the potential breach. That's not a big deal. So in here, you'll see that I have copies of all 3 servers. I know this is hard to see, but I have the one-shot servers in there. And then I've got my game down here, the executable. I've got a libs folder, assets, and rungame.sh, as well as a run me first. And I will upload these by the time this video is published. There's also my bundle.ini and some other gobbledygook that I didn't need. But that's all I needed to get it working, aside from modifying my game's code. So I use this so that I can drag and drop, and I keep a temp folder where I'm building my Windows side copy of what I'm copying over to the remote host, which in this case is the Atari, and then I can copy stuff back if I make modifications. One cool thing about the WinSCP is that not only can you send a terminal command without having to log in, but you can also right-click and edit a file remotely. And in my case, it comes up in Notepad, and then I can make modifications. So in my version of that script that we just looked through, I do not go anywhere. I assume that I'm already located in the Atari executable folder, and everything is built off of that. And I go into /libs. I go into CD. I go CD into the server folder. Run the server from its own... Hold on. Okay. Apparently my Atari's going through an update process. Anyway, you go in here and you got one-shot production. So I go into the server folder, I run it with it in the background, and then I exit it. Again, I'm going to upload this script. Exit that folder, and then I sleep, and then I run. So it's very similar to the one that's there, but it's slightly modified, and I'll fix that. But the one that I actually have the dev dashboard running is this run me first. And it runs the other script. Big deal. But that just gives me a little more freedom to make modifications. So I've got my assets folder and yada yada. All right. I'm going to bring up Appaloon 2 VCS. So here's my Appaloon project in the latest, well, almost latest version of GameMaker. It's like one version back, because once I start publishing, I don't upgrade in the middle of things. Anyway, under objects, I've created one called controller. And this was, again, I'm shoehorning this in at the end of the development cycle. So I had to do this because I updated my version of the IDE from that 5.8.9 version, because I wanted to move on from that old version. But, okay, there goes the Atari. It's working. So I've got my application ready. Here is the controller. In the create, and I know that this is tiny. There we go. Okay. I set pad data to false. I set the server to this object. I set the host to that. And the, actually I override it. That's silly. I guess either work. Okay. And then so you can test this by actually running the server on your Atari and then pointing it at your Atari. Does work. So then you can have your classic controller plugged in, to your Atari, but see the data on the screen on your Windows platform. Don't need to do this. It's just true. Okay. The port is 1234. You don't need to change that. And it creates a socket using the create socket TCP. It sets the remote to the socket host and port. If there is no remote, it does nothing. Otherwise, it sends hello using this code. And again, I'm going to stick this code up in a new README file. It'll probably be called TLDR. We'll see. All right. And then in the async networking, I have this block of code. And what it's doing is it's already received the data in an async load event. So it knows that it's network type data. This could be file data, but in this case, it's network type data. It's coming from outside. And if your game uses networking, this will not work. You're going to have to write around that. But if you know how to write networking code, then you're going to write your own implementation. But essentially, all it has to do is grab the string, because every time it dumps a buffer, it's a buffer string that contains an entire set of parsable JSON data. And then you just run JSON parse on it. Now, there's a little subtle thing going on in here where it will set pad data to false only in the case that it had a failure. But, it will not set it to false in the case of a failure. It used to, but that was problematic. So now it only sets pad data equal to the new data in the event that new data arrived. And could be de-JSONified. So otherwise it just sets it to the old data. So O is set to pad data, and then in the event of failure, pad data is reset back to its old value. And for that reason, you may need to check against frame, but I don't add a lot of infrastructure to this. I think VCS, first of all, it runs if you just run a game like this on the VCS, it works flawlessly, so there's no reason for me to add a bunch of error, networking not available, and crap that the user's not going to be able to deal with anyway. If the user just goes, maybe you would have a pop-up that said, there's an issue, please restart the game. That's fine. But they're not going to be able to reset the server. They're not going to be able to do anything if something were to fail. And it won't, because as far as I know, the entire VCS can shut off in this hibernate mode and come back on, and everything will still be a-okay. But generally what happens is once the server's running and the game is running, the VCS will not shut off. But they can use the Fuji button to kill it, to get out of it, and both things stop. So everything is fine. It's all kind of hidden and under wraps in this one-shot server. Okay. So anyway, this goes on and on and on throughout the entire life of the game cycle, and when this game ends, it automatically closes the connection. You don't have to write a single line of code to do that. And then when the networking ends, the server goes, oh, you disconnected. You were my one user. I'm going to shut down. But most and then it exits 0, as you saw in that script. But the reality is that when that script exits 0, there is a little bit of a pause while that server shuts down. And that pause is like seconds, like a second. So that's only when they naturally exit the game through the menu or something like that. So they won't even notice, and the server runs. Now the server, the reason why it kills itself is because that way it's not zombied off in the background somewhere. And the thing is that the server will also not run if it detects and then a server is already running on port 1234. So it goes, oh, there's already a zombied old copy running, for example. So then your game runs without the server running, but the server's running somewhere else zombied. So it's receives the... All right, cats. Oh, God. Cats are writing code. We can't have that. So in that event, that zombied server receives the connection. You play your game. It's working. And then when you quit the game, the zombied one goes away. So it's a way to conserve the resources and make sure that everybody is... every server gets its day. But it'd be very rare for that to happen. I don't think that'll ever happen. But it is the behavior if it were to happen. So what else is there to this? Well, let's look at how the controls work in my game now, because I had to shoehorn this in. So under scripts, I've got this thing called VCS GML, which I'm going to publish. And in that, I've written a bunch of different little helpers. So ignoring that. Oh, wait, this is not even the code I use. Is this? I don't think I use this code. Let me see what else I got. Controls, what we got? Yeah. Okay. So in controls, I have written the world's simplest way to detect if it's an Atari or not. So, theoretically, you're writing a version that is specific to your Atari. So, if you're writing a Linux version of your game, this is not adequate. If you have an iOS version of your game that is the same source code as the Atari version, this is not adequate. There's no way to really detect the Atari. There may be some way that you could detect it using a check if file or folder exists kind of a function and look for the Atari's folder structure, which is somewhat unique. But this is the easiest way for me to do it because I know that this version is going to be tested on Windows. New features are going to be added, and then it's going to be handed off to Atari. And also keeping in mind that this is not the only way that it determines what to do with control stream. So the data stream from the controllers will still be gamepad commands if the controller never works out. So if you go back to the controller and you take a close look, you'll note that in the step, if it's not connected, it will attempt to connect. If it doesn't connect, it doesn't do anything. Okay? It just tries again. All right? And at some point along the line, it's never going to work, right? Like, for a local host, it could do a little bit more there. You could limit the number of times it does this to something like 5 or 100. But ultimately, It's first it's trying right off the bat. And if it doesn't get a connection then, it tries again and again and again. There is a small amount of overhead to that, but honestly, it doesn't matter. It won't matter. But you could have it even destroy itself after, say, 50 attempts, let's say, or even 5 or 10 attempts. This could be elaborated upon. This is the one that mine is published with, though. It doesn't have all that. But the reason why you would want to do that is because the other way that why does this matter? It matters because it asks the question, am I on a non-Windows box? And is there a pad server? Where does this pad server get created? Where does controller get created? Well, let's look at it really quickly. You'll note that it is a visible, persistent object with no sprite. Okay? Persistent means that it will not be destroyed until you explicitly destroy it, no matter what room you switch to. So let's jump on down to the startup room in my game, and let's center it, and let's take a look at the creation code. In the creation code, it asks, let me zoom that. Well, in the creation code, it asks if it's not a Windows box, then try to create, or then go ahead and create the controller off screen by 15 pixels. Otherwise, set it to new one. This, again, could be elaborated on. If you had a better way of detecting the Atari, you could do that here. This worked for me. So I'm going to go on down to controls again. So none of the commands will work without JServer being true. And JServer is only true when there's new data in the pipe. So once JServer is true, it's going to start using the JServer pad data that's been JSON parsed into this global variable pad data. Otherwise, it's going to use the GameMaker function, gamepad get device count. For example, in JDeviceCount, if the server's running, get me that array size. Otherwise, get me the device count. Now, keeping in mind that technically pad data device array is the same length as the device count because it's been built based on this value being run in a different build of GameMaker. Because basically you're running two games. You're running the server, which is written in GameMaker and is a game that uses the audio channel, and then I'll come back later. And also you're running your game, which uses the audio channel, and then they network to each other. That's technically what's happening. So it is GameMaker's get device count is coming through JDeviceCount in one way or another. And then there's this JConnected function, which asks, is there a controller for this player number? Player number always starts with 1. So player 1 is PN1, which is device. The device code for that is PN-1 or device 0. So this is part of the way that you'd say, is player 1 available? Is player 2's controller available? JType, this function, I'm going to publish all this code, but basically JType is the best possible way I could detect whether or not it is a classic controller or a modern controller. And you could add to this X input, for example. You could, it's right here actually. Or you could add other way, like the PS4 or PS3 controllers have special ways to detect them. But these are the best ways I could figure out to detect the classic and the modern. So it returns the string classic or modern if it is one of those two devices. And that's true both on Windows and on the VCS, except that on Windows, it actually returns X input for the modern because it is set to that mode on Windows because Atari. Anyway, JName is the same as doing get gamepad description. JGUID is the same as doing get gamepad GUID. I'm sorry, gamepad get GUID with the failsafe of returning nothing. JButton count is going to try to get you the number of buttons available. The button, and I recommend everything be done with the button axis and hat values directly, not through any of those special codes like GH or LR, LH axis and all that. You don't use any of that. Use the direct detections because there's really only hat 0 on either of these devices, and there's a number of other controls like buttons and axes, but some of the buttons use the axes and some don't. Okay, now in my game, so once we get to line 198, those are the basic control detections. So axis count, axis value, hat count, hat value. I noticed the bug right here. I'm going to fix it right now. Axis value, axis count, hat value, hat count, button value, button count. Okay? And then on the following commands, these are written because of a couple of reasons. One, it's specific. These are the ones that are kind of specific to my game. So you might need to make some slight modifications here. But basically, you have to break your game down into the actions that you want to detect. And then you need to write those actions as a J function here. And then those J functions, they're going to be called by your object. So, for example, J pressing left, if I did a search all and I did a J pressing left, you'll see that this shows up in a number of places. It shows up in a debug call inside of controller. It shows up in level controller, which in my case allows them to enter their high score. And also, it's the button that they press to start the game when there's no players. It also shows up in the player, and it shows up in the player in a couple of places where it repeatedly tries to detect if the player is pressing left or right. And then it shows up in this location. And so let's just talk about pressing left. So for me, pressing left means either sticks pressed to the left, or the classic is being pressed to the left, or the D-pad on the monitor is being pressed to the left. And I did not write in support for X input because I have not yet developed this game for the Xbox. And this game is going to default, again, these function, everything that is under ifj server, okay, you can think of that as on the VCS, because everything outside of that is going to be the regular old gamepad vanilla stuff from the GameMaker library, or it's going to be, in my case, a special function that detects left, which I was using prior to shoehorning this in. So I would call controls get left whenever I needed to get is the player, and I pass it the player number. So player 1 pressing left is the question that it asks and answers, right? So, and that's using only direct calls to gamepad or my own, cooked up version of those calls, which, on an Xbox, it's not going, I assume, it's not going to register as not Windows. I'm not sure yet. But this game is only for Windows and for VCS. If you had more, any of that non-VCS stuff, just have it happen inside of whatever you default or fall back to. Because, you're not going to need to write special controls for the VCS because those are being handled inside of this. And I think that's really important to remember. There are different ways that you can expand this code, but this is how I ended up needing it to be written. And for me, I only have left, right, up, down, Fuji button, start, and select. Okay, Jarvis. Close all. Close all. Hey, Jarvis, close all. Alright. My Chinese USB controller. Hey, Jarvis, close all. Close all. Alright. So, good. So, basically, the start and select buttons, the A, the B, that's all I use in my game. So, I have the left and right thumbsticks mapped to left and right, and I also have the D-pad mapped to left, right, up, down. So those are all doing the same things. This is code that asks, the VCS just turned off. Hold on a second. One second. One shin split later. All right, so the bottom line is, as I wrap things up here, is that this is a one way. So it's asking like, is axis 0 set to that? Is axis 3 set to that? And those are how I detect, or is the hat set to a certain number? And that's how I detect the directions. And this is all well tested code. I'll stick it up there again as demonstration. You can split that up into left and right. You could ask, is left running? Is left being pressed? Is right being pressed? For the thumbstick, for example, or however you want to name this stuff. But A and B could be expanded into or split off into A, B, X, Y. But again, I'm trying to support both controller types. So I want everything to fall in line under these controls. Now, there is a distinction between Fuji start and select, except there's actually no equivalent on the X input controller. But basically, all of these things do the same thing for me. Fuji excluded, start and select both pause for me. So, all right. Anyway. Your mileage may vary, what you need to do may vary, but these are then called in the parts of the game that need to ask, is this controller being pressed? And it only asks, is it currently being pressed? So if you need to store information about last frame, that's up to you. If you want to make a little object that has these values in it, that's how I used to do it. Down here, I just broke it out into functions, but it used to be all one. Here's the one object version where, in this case, this is the original controls where I had everything in an object, and then I could map left, right, up, down to left, right, up, down, and I actually don't use A or B. But these are all I would just ignore these. But this was for all 8 controllers. So it asks, is the gamepad count big enough? If so, then let's check it against that for player 6, yada, yada, yada. But this is all using the vanilla gamepad, so this is all the fallback stuff. And I actually don't use that object anymore at all. I just call these J functions now. But these J functions could be put into a single object, and then you could call get controls, then you get your controls object, and then you say if controls.left or whatever it would be. And that's one way that I've organized my controls. But you need that middleware, either in a series of functions or in a single object that has a bunch of methods in it that will handle all of that for you. Anyway, Okay, so let's say that you've got close to, you've copied my code, you've plugged in a couple of the functions, you've got the controller set up, you export. So the way that you export is you go up to your targets and you select Ubuntu, which you've already set up. For me, I have an Elite 2 box, okay? That is just a fancy name for a media server that I bought cheap on eBay. And on it, I have installed Ubuntu 18.04. Okay? You can still download that and install it, but it has to be a physical box. And it's just like building for any other Linux box. So I select YYC compiler, Ubuntu, Elite 2. For me, it would be a no Steam release mode. I don't know exactly what release means versus not, but there's some setting difference. Anyway, so now I'm going to be building for Linux. I'm going to hit the clean button. It's going to reach out to that Elite 2 and try to connect. And of course, mine's on and running and at the same IP address. So it went and it cleaned everything. Now I'm going to click the Create Executable button. And then it's automatically set to app image. I'm going to change that to zip. And I'm going to locate a folder somewhere that's a good place to stick that. So we'll bop over to my, just anywhere. It doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be your VCS temp folder unless, I guess it is here. I don't know. I think I had it in this folder, actually. Yeah, there's 53. So 53 was the last one I made. But it doesn't have to be named anything specific. Just keep track of it. It's a unique build. And then I'm going to call mine 53.5. Okay. So it's the zip version. I'm going to save it. All right. It takes a while. It's right now it's reached out to the Linux box. And it's building all the audio files, and it's got the now it's running the PSCP. So it's copying files over. Now it's running CLang, and it's running a compiler, an LLVM, and it's compiling it for Linux for Ubuntu 18.04. You could try 20.04, but I think it's 18.04. Let me. So maybe. How do I? Let me look. I'm not really sure I can tell the exact version, but I'll look through this when it's done. Anyway, it's I can hear it. It's doing the build. I'm not going to go through the setup of this, but there's a way that you set up your Steam library on there, and you set up your GameMaker build stuff, and that stuff is well documented. There are links inside of the GitHub to you basically can dig around, but you're just setting up Linux to build for, and it might work with newer versions of Ubuntu, but I would stick to the version that I'm using. Let me just double check that it's not a different. Might be 20.04, might be 20. It actually says well. Wait a minute. Yeah. I'm not sure what the SSH address is, which is why I'm not sure how I'll get connected to it, but there must be some way. Let's see if I can see it in my platform settings. Guess it's not there. General settings. Compiling. Maybe under the this thing. Just click there. Let's do that. Okay. Device. All right, let's bop out there. So I happen to have WSL2 installed, which is a Linux subsystem for Windows. So I'm just going to use that. And okay. Looks like it's 20.04.6 LTS. Oh, no, that's not. It's 1804. It is 1804. So it's got 1804 installed, and then I follow the instructions to install the GameMaker libraries and the build environment. All right, 1804. Okay, so then I've built that for 1804, but so that box is going to have any other libs that you need to copy that are missing, but you've already downloaded the one from. And in fact, I'll again re-upload. Oops, I will re-upload the libs that I used last. But here we are. Okay, reconnected. All right, let's reconnect. Okay, so my libs folder looks like this. It's pretty much. I think there was something around. It looks good to me, but one of them may be different. Might be this libcrypt. libgcrypt. I don't know. I feel like something was updated. It looks like they all have kind of recent dates from last year, but all right. I don't think I added. Maybe this libgimp. I'm not really sure. But anyway, we're gonna so you have these files there, and that's gonna override the ones that are loaded. You put so inside this zip that we just created, let's go in there for a second. Yeah, that's great. We're just gonna, I'm probably gonna describe this to you because it's too small, but so here's a version of it. Let me just unzip. You unzip this. I use WinRAR, but you can use 7-zip, whatever. You got it in there. Okay. Now, here's the thing. You're going to need WSL2, or you're going to need to use your Linux box, because so you're on Windows, or maybe you're on Linux, but you got to move this stuff, your package that you're preparing. You need to stick that in a subfolder on your user's home folder, and then you're going to be running it via the command line. I like to use Teraterm. Teraterm. It's a Japanese program. We're going to continue. Just going to log in to the Atari user. Okay. Now I'm logged into the Atari here. Okay. And this folder that I just LS'd is the same as this folder that's in WinSCP. It's the home folder. In my case, I just did it in the home folder, but you might want to create a subfolder just to stay away from some of the files in there. Ultimately, you've got all that. So over here is what GameMaker made. Okay. Actually, this isn't it. Let me find. Where did I put that? Under 42? No, under 46 rather. Yeah, right. So let me just unzip this. So prior to sending it over to, why is it half as big? That's interesting. Oh, I know why. Okay, so all you get is an assets folder and an Appaloon 2 folder. So next to this, we're going to create a new folder called libs, and we're going to put the contents of the libs zip that you downloaded earlier into that. And you're going to end up with a bunch of so.number files that are right here. And that's in your lib folder. Then you're going to create another folder called server, and you're going to put into that the one-shot production server, and you're going to rename, so example, new folder, server, okay, in there, we're going to stick the contents of One Shot Production, which is server and assets. But it's probably named, has a longer name. You need to change that name. So you put it in here under server and you rename the long ass executable name, which is Atari VCS GameMaker Gamepad Server One Shot Production. You're going to rename that to server. Okay. Now you've got your server. So you got your server, your assets. Now we're going to make your lib folder, libs. Okay. And in libs, we're going to put all of the files from that zip file that you downloaded that was provided in the early days with the libs in it. Now you've got that. Now you need to create in this folder new text file, okay, and that's going to be your script, and you're going to create two. One is called run_game.sh, okay, that's got all the meat in it, all right, and then you're going to create another one called run me first, and that's literally going to have like 1 or 2 lines in it, and it's just going to call sh run ./run_game.sh, and then run me first is going to be the name of the executable that you put in your bundle file. So in your bundle file, it says exec equals run me first. Okay. No ./ or anything. And you update your version number. Okay. Cause you're going to be uploading this to the store. So you got your bundle INI should be here as well. Okay. And then you copy that directly to your folder on your VCS. Okay. And then you log into your VCS via TerraTerm, okay? You go into the folder and you type chmod A plus, or I'm sorry, 007, or sorry, chmod 0777 space -R, capital R, space star, hit return. That will set the right bit attributes on everything so that it's all executable and all readable by all of the world. And then you should be able to type a command, which would be export. So my Atari just turned off again. And that's the thing. You gotta get your controller near you and keep hitting the button in order to keep it alive. But once the Atari's going, then you can type into the Terra terminal. Terminal. Where is that? Where did I close it? Oh yeah, it closed because the Atari shut off. Well, anyway, you type the command export. Display equals :0 semicolon / run me first, and it will actually run on your VCS, and you'll be able to test your game. Once you repeat that process enough that you have by editing your game, copying the new executable over, all you have to copy after the initial creation of this folder and all of these scripts and everything, all you have to do after that is copy just the new stuff. So the assets and the executable of your game over. You just keep copying the new versions of that until you've got all of your controls verified working. And then you can copy it back to your machine. And then you can copy it over. You have to put it onto a Linux computer. So your build box, you can put it on your build box, that folder. And then on that machine, you chmod everything to the correct settings. And then you zip it on that machine. Because the Atari VCS OS does not have zip on it. It also does not have unzip. That's why app images don't work. So you have to do this. You have to have it chmod 0777, every file, every folder, and then you have to zip it up on a Linux machine with the bundle file. Then you take that zip file and you upload that to the dashboard and you give it a new number that matches the bundle ionized new version number. And then you push it, you save it or update it, whatever the button is in that. And I recommend using Chrome exclusively for that. And then you could then go to your VCS and you can check the store and it will instantly be updated in your store. and then you can test it in the actual store environment. And it should work the same, at which point you can say, hey, Davpa, I'm ready to go, bud. Although I recommend that you spend about a week testing it with friends and playing it for a long time to make sure that absolutely nothing bad happens. Now, I will tell you the known issues. If your game crashes, it will return to the store fine. But there are some scenarios where you'll note where if you hit the Fuji button to pause the game, there's a problem. Because when you unpause the game with the Fuji button, this is a special thing for the Atari. If you hold the Fuji button down, you can get to the Atari menu. And when it does that, it changes the order of the windows. So your server gets priority audio, not video, just audio. And then if you were not to close the game in the Atari store and instead were to resume, there is a, let's say, 60%, not every time, but 70, 60% chance that the audio will appear to not work anymore. And that's because the window order has changed in the audio only, and there's no way for me to tell GameMaker to build a game without audio support, which would be a great way to get rid of this server. Now, there may be some way to trick the server into using a fake audio device, but I have not yet spent the time necessary to figure that out, because frankly, the fact that it even works on it at that point, I am happy. Oh well, don't pause the game using the Fuji button. Use an in-game pause. And that's what I ended up doing, is adding that. Because it's just, we've entered into it. I don't even know that any lengthy technical investigations of that will even be fruitful. And I have a feeling that they won't be. So that's the one known issue, is that will happen. Otherwise, I've had no issues. If the game crashes and it throws up a window, it does seem to slow things down if you don't catch that right away. But hopefully your game isn't crashing with a regular old dump. I don't know. But if it does, you can still hold the Fuji button to get out of it. So it just takes a little bit longer than normal. And that's it. That's my overview. I know it's been like an hour and a half or 2 hours, but that's everything. And I'm going to upload this code to the repo in just a little bit after I make this video.